Brilliant. Thanks everyone for bearing with us then. So we're just returning to our discussion on the recommended service delivery models. So is any other further questions on the council's choices? If we go to Caroline first.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to ask how it would be monitored. Is it going to be, are we going to be using Fix My Street still, or will there be some other way of monitoring where the actual trouble spots are?
I'm going to say yes, because because we need to keep Fix My Street after the fight we had to keep it. But I'm looking at officers nervously because I want to keep it very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, in terms of front facing from that perspective. So from a user's perspective, so we'll be utilizing that as the interface into our CRM system. And then we'll be looking at the back office IT system that will link into that. So it's like a hub and spoke model where it will go from Fix My Street into our corporate CRM. And then we'll have to think of the IT solution from a back office system perspective. So that will be the slabs and the cabs where they can do their recording out in the team. So there's a whole IT specification that officers are drafting and discussing with our internal IT department in order to make sure that we have the right solution in the future to do that recording and reporting. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much. Dan, if I come to you next, please.
I want to applaud I want to applaud the task for the report, and also for mandating that all the terms and conditions for any future staff would have to be Merton's terms and conditions. I think that's a great step, regardless of the work of the Merton or the contracted out. What conversations have you had with trade unions about the options here, and how have they been involved?
So the leader and I have met with Unison, and we're in the process of getting a meeting in with GMB, which are the two main unions on the contract, and we'll be more than happy to speak to any others that wish to contact us.
Great, thanks so much. Dan?
Yeah, with this hybrid approach with part commercialized and part in-house, how do you make sure the entire service is captured between the two of them and nothing falls down by the wayside? For example, the public rights of way in the last contract was missed off originally, amongst one or two other things. How can you make sure nothing gets missed out?
By not missing out on the spec. I think we're not missing out public rights of way this time. I don't like to use the word journey because it sounds too much like the X Factor, but we have been on a journey on this, and we've learned a lot, and we know what needs to go into this spec now, and we know what the pitfalls are. So we don't miss that out by making sure we have a very solid specification that covers the areas we need it to cover. As I said before, I'm happy to bring that here so that people can have a look at it and see if there are things we're missing and we haven't considered. Because, you know, that's the way we're going to build this service and keep Merton clean, is if everybody understands what it's here to do.
Great, thank you. John, if you want to come to that.
If I could add to that, I think the primary focus of that question would be more related to the street cleansing services rather than the waste collection services, and hence the adaptability of the model as an in-house provision. Nothing is left for 8 years. It's something that you can address in the primary on that day, and then looking at your review periods. So that lends itself to that model in terms of the adaptability of the service to be able to do that. However, we do have a huge realm of data and a very detailed specification, and hence why we don't want an outcome-based specification. We want something with the minimum requirements, because it makes officers go through their due diligence as well, not just reliant on others, but us to go through to make sure every I and T, as much as reasonably practicable, is delivered upon. Thank you.
Great, thanks, John.
There's a trial underway at the moment on bringing recycling closer to the residents. Will that be complete by the time the contract goes to tender? And which part of that operation will it be under? Will it be under the waste or under the street sweeping?
Well, I think the pilot will be done by the time we get to 2025, so we'll understand what the cost of that is, and we'll understand where it needs to go. Currently, it's sitting with the waste collection team because it's a recycling function basically, and the management of things like Garth Road would sit in that side of the business because that's where all the kind of the heavy duty stuff is. But as I said, I think the pilot will be done by 2025, so we'll really understand what we need and what we can hope to achieve with it.
John, did you want to comment on that? Okay.
No, quite succinct. That's the response. Thank you.
Any other questions in this part of the agenda? And if not, I'll then move on to recommendations. So are there any recommendations that people would like to pass or to suggest rather?
I think the first one will be to follow up on the cabinet member's suggestion, which is before the contract goes out tendered, the specification should be, and sort of the review of the service, what gets put into what, should come back to this panel with more details at the time, and we can have a look, make sure there are no gaps. So whether that can get scheduled in at an appropriate point before it goes out to tender.
Let's bring Natasha just to come up.
I think the main benefit of bringing it here would be for the street sweeping, which wouldn't be going out to tender. That would be here. We're under quite a tight deadline for the collection because we need to get it to the GLA by a certain amount of time. So I don't know what we can practically do. I don't know if officers want to come in terms of what we can share and when.
Thank you very much, Chair. So in terms of the specification, Councillor Hines is absolutely correct. There's two separate timelines that we need to be governed by. Certainly the requirements, if the cabinet decision is to outsource the waste collection, we do have to factor in a minimum of 57 days to the GLL on that specification. So that tight deadline is looming. So we would need something scheduled certainly within the next 4 to 6 weeks. Street cleansing, if the recommendation is to bring it in-house, then we've got an 18-month period to mobilise and develop those services. So certainly there's room to bring the street cleansing specification broken down into its constituent parts, with officer recommendations of how that specification looks and how that's developed away from the BAU model, the business as usual model, to the areas that officers are recommending an enhanced service. So certainly we can bring that element back to this group for scrutiny.
Okay, so I mean so it sounds like that's a reasonable thing that we can it can be brought back on the waste collection side. Something can be brought to scrutiny panel before, I assume, that before contracts are signed, or how soon to that effect?
Certainly for the waste collection service, there'd be a number of key milestones that we need to go through. One, we will need to issue the specification and get that approved by the GLL. Then subject to the dialogue with the external market, there will be a process in which we would have to come back through cabinet prior to the award of any contract, including the specification that's been delivered at an agreed cost through the tender process. So there's a number of key milestones that there's interjections that scrutiny could play a valued role.
Great. And what kind of time, when do you think that timing might be? When could that be coming back to cabinet and I guess to SUSCOMs at the same time?
I think the most valid time to bring it back to this committee would be when we propose to issue it to the GLA. During that period, that because 99% of it will be statutory requirements that we have to do under because of the Environmental Protection Act or subsequent acts. So there won't be a lot of play with the waste and recycling service specification, but I think it is a good time for us to then look at it and see how it's formed, how it acts, because that will also be the form which the street cleansing service specification will be developed. So we'll be developing the waste and recycling one first because of the requirement to ensure that it has value and supports the London environment strategy. So that's why it has to go to the GLA to make sure it hits those conditions. So there is like a gatekeeping process with that. It'd be good for members to see it at that point. And then that lends itself also into the development of the future street cleansing service specification. It is quite a nuanced and dry subject area. So, I mean, it almost might not be the most dynamic committee meeting. So we're able to be flexible and operate how you would want it as a panel presented to you. But it is something that I would probably do it in that stage, and that allows officers to develop it in a short time period to meet those deadlines that we're required to do. Thank you.
Great. So I mean, if it was something like the panel recommends that further details of the contract specification are brought back to a future sustainable communities meeting, yeah, at an appropriate time before everything's official. Something like that. John.
In that case, would it be possible to put a couple of recommendations now for the waste services? Would that be useful, or would it be too late to do it when it comes back to scrutiny?
I think we'll be doing some now. So is everyone happy with that? As I crudely worded that, in basically bringing back the panel recommends that detail for the details of the contract are brought back to a future sustainable community meeting at the appropriate time when that works. Can someone seconder? So Dan's proposing it. Anyone wants to second it? Slavek?
Sorry, Chair. No, I mean, it appears that we've got two deadlines here.
Mm-hmm.
So shouldn't we have two opportunities for scrutiny for the two services?
So for both
rather than put it under the same heading and saying, surely in your recommendation, I would say that under each head, that we have an opportunity to scrutinize each service, each specification.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything excluding one or the other in that, but yeah, I'm happy with that amendment if everyone, if that's agreeable to you, Dan. Yeah. Okay, well, so if Dan and if Slavek's still happy to second it, I mean, do you want to just read out what you understand from that, Rosie, just so everyone's on the same page of what we're agreeing to? That's great to me. So all those in favor? All those against? And all those abstaining? I think that passes. Thank you. Next recommendation, Caroline.
Yes, I'd like to recommend that street sweeping schedules are published on the council website.
Yeah, yeah.
Dan's just said we have been asked for a long time, but when we control them, we can do that, and I think that makes it. Yeah, I agree with you. We've been asking for that for a while, but now we can control it. It's up to us.
Right, does it have a seconder? Dan? Great. So all those in favour of bringing back that proposal? Great. You understand that? Do you have that? That's great. All those against and all those abstaining. Great, thank you. So that passes. James.
Yeah, Chair, I'd like to recommend that when Cabinet is considering specification of the new contract, that we prioritise and schedule the street sweeping days after the bin collection days.
Great, that sounds sensible to me. So Dan seconding that. So all those in favour? All those against, and all those abstaining. So that passes unanimously. Thank you. Any other recommendations for the panel? John?
Say, we know the environmental requirements and the requirement to go to net zero. But the council, I think, has an ambition to be net zero by 2030. Can we ensure that the contract goes in that says that the vehicle fleet provided by the contractor should contribute to that by 2030 at the latest?
It sounds a good idea, but I might ask for Natasha and officer's view on how that could fit in with the council's.
Is it already a requirement? Is that already, but because I think we've already put that in the budget and it's already been decided on.
We are moving in that direction, and yes, that can be accommodated in respect to meeting those requirements. Yeah.
So just to be clear, is that a requirement now? Is that something that's already in there, or is that something that would be new?
As we will be moving into new models, it doesn't hurt not to include it. You know, currently within its model, we're moving in that direction, and it was measured within the best value evaluation in regards to sustainability. So we have a sustainability clause within that. So we have evaluated in that regards. Thank you.
But would it be worth to say, I can't speak for everybody here. I mean, given that we've put the money aside for it and we're already, because that's what's in our capital program and that's what's in the capital program for adapting Garth Road. So we are planning to do that anyway. Is it worth saying to continue that work? Is that what we should be saying rather than starting afresh because that work's already underway? Should we continue the work? Is that right?
To me, it's just the deadline of 2030 to make sure it's done by then. That's all. I know we're moving in the right direction,
but we can't, as in decarbonize everything in the council by 2030 for this or this particular contract.
So I think Martin wanted to have something to.
I'd like that to be continued because obviously we're doing that already, and I think we've already agreed that would happen, and that work is ongoing. So from my side, I would want that. I'd support with continue.
Okay. I mean, John, is that agreeable to you? Yeah, to make sure they have that deadline. Okay. So Rosie, do you under?
Does that?
Sure.
just to ensure that the contract agreed will state that the vehicle fleet needs to be carbon neutral by 2030.
So it could be ensure that the work is continued to make sure that the fleet is net zero by 2030. That if that works.
That's fine.
Natasha, you.
Yeah, I think to restate that we continue in that work, because I think the importance is to say that it's already happening. I don't want it to start afresh. We're already processing that work. There's already people in the building doing that work. So I think stating continue is quite important.
You just repeat just one time what you have there. Cool. Is that an accurate reflection of the yeah. Second, who wants to second that proposal? Claire? Fantastic. Okay, so all those in favour of continuing the work the council's doing on net zero and make sure we have a deadline by 2030? All those against and all those not voting? Great. Thank you very much. Any other recommendations? Dan?
I had two, if I could be cheeky. They kind of link to each other though. It's about performance monitoring of the contract after the contract is secured, and whether officers can work up a process whereby us as a committee, SUSCOMs, can feed in and scrutinize the contract performance. So whether we can get that as a recommendation. And secondly, whether it'd be possible to ask for ward-based dashboards about flighted hotspots, so councillors can see where the flight to hotspots are in the ward, like in a nice map form, perhaps, or something like that.
Yeah, they both sound like good sessions. So, Rosie, can you just repeat the two recommendations as you have them written down? Sorry, Dan, could you? Yeah, no, fair enough.
Officers work come up with a process for sustainable SUSCOMs, whatever the proper title is, feed in and scrutinize contract performance.
Maybe we'll take that one now, and then we can come back to the second one. So, is there a seconder for that proposal, Slavek? Great. So, all those in favour? All those against and abstaining? Great. Thank you. And then if we move on to the second one that Dan suggested, do you want Dan to repeat that again? Yeah.
This panel recommends that the council introduces ward-based dashboards identifying flight tip hotspots for elected representatives information.
Great. Is there a seconder for that, James? Great. All those in favour? And all those against and not voting? Great. It's passed unanimously. Dan?
As part of the waste collection contract, I would recommend a clause or option for whichever provider innovates and looks for new technologies to minimize food waste being accessed by wildlife.
Engage technologies.
I know that, and I get a lot of things about my foxes now open food waste bins. But what do we do? How do we stop foxes opening food waste bins? Right. I could say something cheeky about fox hunting, but I'm not going to. I don't know. Reviewing our containers and stuff, things might be part of the process. I'm not sure what we can do about foxes and food waste bins.
Chair, go.
Just bring in John
I
first.
could add some clarity. So I think we would continue to use best practice in terms of any future container provision or requirement, because they'll evolve in order to have better locking mechanisms over time. But we will be somewhat reliant on what technologies are out there at any given time. Thank you.
Does that say the need for that? Okay, great. Are there any other recommendations, Caroline?
Yes, I'd like to recommend that if we're taking on any new staff, presumably for the street cleaning, that opportunities are promoted to people with learning disabilities and with autism.
I think that work happens with that at the moment. Actually, John, you're nodding your head. Maybe John or Charlie, even you could elaborate a bit on what that work looks like at the moment.
So it's a very valid point, and certainly under the social value, we would look to that on the waste collection sides to see where that innovation comes in, and certainly there's social value options around employing not only long-term unemployed, but those specifically with learning difficulties. It does come with additional challenges in terms of the supervision and the management of those staff. It's done incredibly well at the moment. We do have a small team of 7 operatives, all that are previously registered with MenCap, that tupied over to Veolia on the street cleansing side. And if the decision is to bring the street cleansing in-house, then those staff would again tupi back into Merton, and we would continue offering the support and training and guidance and the duty of care to those members of the workforce.
In terms of the service model, as Charlie outlined, we'd already have that support model to encourage that, and it's very productive. What we need to ensure is that we have, in some ways, a cap was orientated to that, so we know what work outcomes that we can do in terms of, because of the efficiency model. I would just say that needs to be it takes a specific resource and trained supervisors in order to go out and undertake those works, and it isn't a translatable skill necessarily to all the infrastructure. So it's really good for site-specific things such as car park cleansings, certain public rights of way where you have a start and a finish. It's in no traffic. So it depends on the areas that we're going to do. So it will have a capped or limited capacity in terms of that model, but it's something that we currently do and we would want to continue. Thank you.
Again, is that one of the things it's whether continues to do, so continue that we do this, that the new service will continue to do this work?
Yeah, it can either be that or Caroline, if that answers your question about kind of, you know, about the concerns or proposal. Do you mean, would you like it to be a recommendation, or are you happy with the work that's going on right now?
No, I'm happy with the work that's going on right now. And yeah, maybe if we could learn a bit more about it, that would be really good. Thank you.
So you okay if it's not a recommendation, and we continue the work on that we're doing at the moment? Is that okay? Yeah, fantastic. John.
This is a bit more of a question as well, but I understand from Clarion that they're going to put in underground waste bins in some of the newer blocks in High Path Estate, and they're providing the vehicle or the funds to the vehicle to deal with that. Is there going to be any consideration of rolling that model out to any other new apartment blocks that are built as a requirement, and extending that even to areas where it's suitable for flats above shops?
Again, I think we need to wait and see what happens with the environment bill, because that's really heavy infrastructure to invest in, and it's going to cost a lot of money. And if suddenly we don't know what we're supposed to be collecting or not collecting, I don't want to make that investment just yet. But now that we've got those vehicles in the borough, at least we know what it will take for that service. But I think at this point we need to work out what we're supposed to be collecting and what we're supposed to allow the producer to collect.
Great, thanks. Is that to answer your question? Okay, great. Stephen.
Chair, given we've mentioned the environment bill a couple of times, I wonder if we might have a recommendation that the cabinet member comes back to SUSCOMS when she's got information on the environment bill and how that impacts on what we're going to be doing.
Yeah, that seems like a smart recommendation. And Rosie, do you have that down as a cabinet member to come back after the publication of the or?
It's the Environment Bill, it's the Environment Act 2021. However, we're waiting for government and the Secretary of State to come out with their set targets and recommendations from that. So that will come through iterations over time. So the act is an act since 2021. However, the gripping outcomes from it, we're still waiting for as officers.
Okay, so we shouldn't hold our breath. Natasha.
I mean, Chair, I don't want to put recommendations in anyone's mouth. I could write to them and ask what the timeline is, and then we could send that response back to SUSCOMS, so that we can try and work backwards from there.
Maybe if we could just if you were able to just do that, and the recommendation could be for you to come back as in Stephen's initial run, and then that would be helpful, and maybe can clarifying that. So if we go with Stephen's initial recommendation of the cabinet member appearing once we have more government guidance. Who'd like to? Dan? So all of those in favour? All those against? And those not voting? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Are there any final recommendations, Samantha?
Hi, thanks. It's just obviously graffiti is a big problem at the moment. Could we have the removal of graffiti be included in the requirements for an in-house cleaning service?
Again, I feel what's going on with that at the moment. So maybe Natasha or one of the officers, I could possibly what we're doing with graffiti.
When we come, I think we need to look at the spec. When we come back and look at the spec, is the time to have that conversation. Because then we will be able to tell you how much that will cost and what that will when and how we do that. There might be other ways of doing that service by contracting in somebody and just blitzing the borough over certain periods of time. So I think it would be best for us to come back when we're doing the spec with you to take you through that process and the costing of it.
That will be brought back in some fashion.
Yeah,
to consider.
yeah, definitely.
And also there is a reasonable charge is mentioned for bulky waste collection. From the consultation, it shows that a lot of people find that a really difficult thing because they have to pay for it, or they don't have a vehicle to get to Garth Road. Is that looked at? How, if there is some sort of leeway to make it cost less or make that more affordable or achievable for people?
So again, we'll come back with the spec because there is a cost implication for that free service. There was a paper that was supposed to be brought back to this committee about bulky waste and garden waste, but the chair didn't want you to have it. I'm joking. I'm joking. Sorry, no, I'm joking. It was just hasn't come back yet, but we can absolutely bring it back here so you can see the detail of it as well. But the mobile Garth Road scheme that we're going to pilot, I'm hoping helps bridge that gap between the cost of that service and providing this free service on a more kind of cyclical basis, so that people do have access to free collections, but we can do it in an affordable way rather than on a kind of door-to-door basis.
Thanks, Natasha. Are there any final comments or recommendations to make? And if not, I'd just like to thank very, very much. I'll bring that to the end of the recommendations, Rosie. I'd just like to hugely thank Natasha for your time this evening and everyone else, and also for the officers for both this evening and all the work that's gone into preparing and getting us this place. So I think with that, that brings us to the end of the meeting. So thanks so much, everyone, and have a great evening. Cheers.